We are supposed to be able to play when we get around God. He actually enjoys having fun. We sometimes miss that. I can't remember which particular brewery this was, but there was a few years ago. There was the commercials got pretty familiar with the bitter beer face. Anybody remember bitter beer face? No? I'm the only one. This is a problem. I promise I was not drinking when this was. You remember bitter beer face. All right. That's what religion does to you. Gives you bitter beer face. We are actually created to be endless. I love what Greg was saying earlier. I cannot remember the Hebrew word, olam, eternity of eternity, forever and forever and forever, beyond and beyond and beyond, beyond the beyond. That concept, that is the one that we serve, and that is who we are, is so important because we give ourselves constraints that are unnecessary. And the beautiful thing about this life that we've been invited into is that we were not called to do it alone. We're not actually supposed to be doing it in our own power. If you can do it in your own power, you're doing the wrong thing. You're not actually accomplishing what you're supposed to be accomplishing, that we're actually called to grab hold of His power and do something that's beyond us. But it's so easy for us to look at ourselves. We look at our capacity, we look at our talents and our giftings, we figure out what's possible, and then we decide how we're going to obey God. And that does not work, because we're going to run into invitations from Him that don't fit within that small little box of our potential. Because what we can see of our potential is not actually the true potential. It's actually just reflections of our history that we can see how they might look in our future. But there's always things that are beyond where we're at now that we have yet to discover. And there are things that are inside of us that we don't even know about. And beyond all of that is just what He wants to do. I was playing around with AI. Didn't have time to get this to put up on the screens, but I was earlier playing around with AI, doing some graphics, and made a picture of a clay pot with this light coming out of heaven, and it was exploding, and there was cracks in the pot with a light flowing out of it. And it's the 2 Corinthians 4:7, I think it's 4:17, for we have this treasure in jars of clay to prove that the power is not of us, but of Him. What we have is clay jars, but what He has is endless glory. And if we will just allow Him to start cracking the shell of our clay jars, endless glory can come out of us. And the potential that is there is His potential, not our potential. We're in the place of obedience and positioning ourselves where He gets to do something that's beyond us simply because we gave a yes. And He uses that yes that we give, and He does something way beyond. All it takes is, yes, sir. I don't get it. Scared of it. Yes, sir. Anybody ever tried to prophesy to somebody before? You ever come up with a word that, I don't see how this fits. This doesn't make any sense to me. But you felt compelled, and so you gave it anyways, and they're like, you have no idea how much that means to me. Because it's not about what we can come up with. If the arts and the prophetic are of the same substance, which they are, One of the things that happens is in the release of them, they reveal something about our own beliefs about ourselves. If you're going to be obedient to God, sooner or later, you're going to have to be confronted with the strongholds that you have in your heart, the things that you think about who you are and what your possibilities are, what you could do. And you're going to have to go beyond the limitations of earthly thinking into something that is not earthly thinking. And if you are willing and able to be honest with yourself, you will always see an echo of yourself in what comes out of you. And that should be an encouragement and at the same time an opportunity for growth. Because we recognize what got blocked, what he was inviting us into that we didn't actually fully step into. We recognize how things got changed as they came through us because of how we released them and where we were fully letting him flow and where we were containing what it was that he was doing through us. And if we can be honest with that, then we can actually deal with those things that are in us that hindered, that limited what he wanted to do the last time that we didn't get to see the fullness of. I think might have been Friday, we were doing some team meeting stuff. I think that was when this came up. Somebody was talking about how, or was it before? At some point in time, you may not have heard this yet. If you have, great. If not, then it didn't come from me. I heard this recently. Somebody's talking about how we often think of God and time. We see God looking at this timeline, and he can see all of time, which is true that he can see all of time, but it's not something that's outside of him. It's actually something that's inside of him. It's not that he's looking at all of time. He's in all of time. And when he looks at us, he doesn't only see us where we're at right now. We see where we've been and we see where we are, but he actually sees the finished product. He actually sees us 20,000 years into the history, into the future, into the history. It's his history. We haven't been there yet, but he's already there. And he can remember it just as well as he can remember what happened 20 seconds ago. And when he sees us, he sees the finished product. And so he gives us these invitations, these moments where he releases something that can come through us so that we can recognize where we're not so we can get to where we're going. And if we can allow that process of reflection, one, stop limiting what he's doing. I can't do that. Perfect. That's a really good thing. So it's one of the great things to do is just periodically look at what you're doing, what you think that you're doing for God. If it's something that you are comfortable with, that you can actually do something different. Because if the only thing you're offering is what you can do, that's not going to have a lot of eternal value. It's got to be something that's beyond you. And if it's something that's beyond you, for you to step into it, it's going to take a risk. You're going to have to start stepping forward, not being sure how it's going to turn out because you have never been here before. Sometimes we get invitations and we step into them and realize, oh, that actually wasn't God. And, the religious mindset's like, well, you screwed that one up. But not God. He's got his video camera. He's got it. I mean, what do they call Facebook in heaven? God book? Instagramming. All the angels can watch. My kids took a step. Wasn't it fun, those of you that have kids, watching them take that first step? Anybody videotape your kids when they were learning how to walk? And you videotape the fails? You didn't even realize it was a fail. You were just celebrating the fact that there was 2 steps before they fell. That's astounding. They did 2 steps. You're not posting it saying, look at my kids fail. And yet we have this idea that God's like, well, look at my kids fail. And instead, he's like, they took a step. Look at them, they put a color. They've never done that color before. They've never let themselves move in front of people before. That's amazing. And he gets excited over what we think of as our weakness. But he sees something very different. He sees something very different when he looks at us. And if we can switch our mindsets, if we can start to recognize, we don't have to wait until we have a finished product to be able to get there. Don't wait until you can win an Olympic marathon to take your first step, or you will never win an Olympic marathon. Not just get used to the idea of failing, learn how to celebrate it. When it's a genuine trying to be faithful, it's a genuine trying. My heart is right. It doesn't matter that my feet tripped over each other. I did something out of response to him and starting to recognize the value of that and how he sees it. How many of you have young children that do art? 3, 4, 5. How many of you actually celebrate that art? How many museums would put that up on their walls? But don't you find it beautiful? Don't you see the value in it because you love the one that made it and you're recognizing they were expressing themselves? And that expression, simply because it was their true expression of themselves, you like it. And if you being evil, you get it? Can love your kids that well, how much more can he love? How much more does he love? How much more does he appreciate those opportunities that we take, that we think of as failures, that he has memorialized on the refrigerator in heaven? We need to start thinking differently. You ever share any of those pictures with other family members? Grandma, grandpa, uncles, aunts, cousins? Don't they like it? They see something there. I'm starting to see them, starting to discover something about this person. As the other family members, when they truly love the child, they love the art too. What if the church was like that? Instead of like the insecure older brother that's pointing out how bad it is to make fun of and pick. Because we're not supposed to be the older brother. Because the older brother at the end of the parable ended still outside of Dad's house. Because he was so worried about everything being right, everything being perfect, and how it's going to look to people. And there were mistakes made. How can we celebrate one that made mistakes? And he ended up outside of the celebration that the Father was throwing, because he was too worried about the mistakes in the image than he was the celebration of the person that had responded to the love of the Father. How often do we as the church end up being the older brother because we're judging, disqualifying because of past experiences, because it didn't match up to our criteria. It would be helpful if there was a way to make sure that the younger brothers that are trying to respond actually stayed inside of the house and the older brothers outside of the house until they were willing to celebrate. So at least they didn't have to wonder if anybody else felt like the older brother's judgmental attitudes. Because a lot of us have heard the words of the older brother, and so we just started to shrink back and hide. And sometimes that older brother was out here, but sometimes that older brother was right here. And it kills the free expression of love and celebration that's in the heart of the Father over every single one of us. It's making sense? I have something open here. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to it. I thought that's where I was going to start, but I'm not even sure how to get there from here now, so... Susan, how many times have you, probably just today, but how many times have you put a color or paint on the canvas and said, that's not right, I've got to fix that? Yeah. But it's not quite right. But you take what's there and you manipulate it. Yeah. Most of it fits in because you can work the mistakes into something beautiful, and it becomes something slightly different than what you expected in the beginning. Yeah, so you're brushing and you've got one color on the brush, but it hits another color and then they merge and it's, oh, wait a second, I didn't mean to do that, but that's creativity. Creativity is rolling with the mistakes and recognizing that it's a part of the journey, because it's not about the destination, but the journey. Yeah, I'll say that through the mic so everybody can hear. Sometimes you got to figure out what you don't like so you can figure out what you do like. This is just our walk with God. That's not about paint. You ever tried to learn how to pray? Do you remember what it was like when you first started to figure out how to pray? I mean, it's funny, like I was having these conversations with God, but then I learned I was supposed to pray, and then I didn't know how to pray. I had no idea. Why? Because I have this picture. I saw how somebody else prayed and how somebody else talked about prayer. I'm like, I don't know if I can do that. Comparison kills. Comparison kills. Your prayer life isn't supposed to look like anybody else's prayer life. Your worship isn't supposed to sound like anybody else's worship. Your color is not supposed to look like anybody else's color. The way the prophetic flows through you is not supposed to look like somebody else's prophetic flow. You weren't created to be a copy. You were actually created to be an individual. I can't remember. I think it was one of the Scottish poets that said something along that way. You're created an original. Don't die a copy. But what religion does is it forces us to all look like a particular picture of success that we have seen in someone else. It takes a machine to make copies. It takes a person to make art. The church isn't supposed to be a machine. We're the body of Christ. We are the person. We get to be ourselves, and every one of us having our own part to play. We get to have our own expression that's different than anybody else's expression. Now, concerning spiritual things, brethren, I don't want you to be ignorant or uninformed or not having knowledge. Paul starts in 1 Corinthians 12. Because God shows up through his Spirit in a variety of different ways, not overwhelming you and making you like something else, but coming through you, co-laboring with you so that your expression is unique. And each unique expression is like the different parts of the body. They're all important. I don't know what my spleen does. I still want it. I mean, I'm not sure that it has value. I don't know. I would guess it does. There's some reason why God put it there, sure, but if somebody said, hey, can I have your spleen? I'd be like, why? It's going to save somebody's life. Okay, yeah, okay. Like that's something different because it's not really about my spleen anymore. It's about what I'm doing for somebody else. But if it's just about me losing it, no, thank you. I'd rather keep it. Why? I don't know. Because it's me. I don't know what that person adds to our body. Well, should we just let him go? No, that's part of my body. I don't know why God made them a part of our body, but they're part of their body, and I want that. Because there's a reason why God put that here. That's important to me. I don't have to understand to value. So we've spent the last 600 years, almost 600 years, a little over 500 years now, working really hard to make reason God of everything human. I mean, the thing that makes humans different than animals is the fact that we can reason, right? I mean, that's so dumb. We even use reason as a way to insult things. It's so ingested into who we are because of the way that we've been educated. We think that our understanding is actually God. Knowledge is power. I mean, if we know enough, we could solve anything. If we had enough knowledge, we could solve the problems of the world. We could cure any disease if we had enough knowledge. If we had enough knowledge, we would be able to fix war. If we had enough knowledge, we would be able to fix poverty. I need to stop putting my foot on that thing. It doesn't like to stay. But the problem is knowledge doesn't fix it. It just defines it. And it only defines it according to the perception of the person that communicated what we call knowledge, which is limited and empty. Our knowledge is not important to our spiritual walk. Let me rephrase that. Our knowledge is not essential to our spiritual walk. Because if I have to understand it to do it, I'm in charge, not God. If I have to understand how it fits and what it's going to do before I'm obedient, my understanding is God. If I have to know whether or not it's going to work according to my predefined ideas of success, so we keep on finding ways to put ourselves on the throne. Because I can figure out what's good and right based upon my own understanding and experience. I can know good and evil for myself. Anybody heard that one before? One of the things in knowledge, this exaltation of knowledge has done is it has made us so that we're so worried about function over beauty. Since the advent of the Enlightenment, around the 1500s, and Enlightenment began, really took root in the 1600s, but it's the rise of reason, the age of reason, some even called it. This idea that we can know everything and knowing everything is going to give us control. So since that period of time, beauty in the church has steadily died. It's been pushed off to the side. It's been marginalized. We're actually more concerned about the budget than we are the beauty. I mean, think about the tabernacle pattern. We just do one piece, menorah. I mean, this is not nearly the size of the menorah. The menorah was 75 pounds of gold. A talent somewhere between 70 and 75 pounds, depending on which source you look at. Do you know what that would be worth in today's money? Yeah, an awful lot. I mean, it's changed since when I did the numbers, but I think right now gold is around $2,400 an ounce. No, I'm sorry, $3,200 an ounce. $3,200 an ounce, 16 ounces in a pound times 17. Millions, tens of millions of dollars. Now imagine If you're part of this church, Tim, if you're part of another church, whoever your pastor is, coming on a Sunday morning and saying, we're going to receive an offering because we're going to build something that's beautiful for God. It's going to cost us $20 million. We're going to put it in a room that only a handful of people will ever be able to go into. How many of us would give sacrificially to that? I mean, think about it. He put the bronze and the silver outside where it was visible, and all the gold and the beauty was inside, where the only people that ever got to see it were the priests that were allowed to go in. And all the people that funded that project got to look at what looked like a dirty hill. I mean, beautiful blues and reds and whites and gold posts and everything else. And then let's cover that with porpoise skins, cover that with goat skins. Make it look like a brown mound in the middle of a brown wilderness. And have all of the beauty hidden. How many of you, while I'm talking about that, had the thought, even if you fought it, that just doesn't make sense? Yeah, most of us, if we're honest. Which tells us how much reason has attached itself to the way that we perceive the world. Which tells us how little value that we have for the hidden beauty that only pleases the heart of God that everybody else misses. Now you put that on steroids and you bring it into the broad church, and you end up with a culture where everybody is trying to figure out how they can get discovered for their gifting so that they can become known and find their platform. Because if it's of value, it must be known. If it's of value, it must be in front of everyone. It should give me a microphone if it actually has value. And so everybody argues over the praise of men, not realizing that what they're really doing is they're fighting with pigs for pods. That we have traded the glory of the Lord's heart being satisfied for the praise of man. And when we're deciding if we're going to be obedient, instead of asking ourselves first if it would please the Lord, we ask ourselves first if it would sound good, look good, feel good to the others around us. So we shrink back. We hold back what should have been glory for him. We hold back out of fear. And when we're really, really honest with ourselves, we realize that much of that fear is we're afraid that we're going to disappoint him. Because, yeah, it's about them because that's the easy one for us to grab hold of. But the echo that's actually deeper in our heart, we wonder if we're good enough for him. I know how little I am. I know how weak I am. Does that really pleased his heart. We have these moments of breakthrough where we recognize, like, I pleased his heart sometimes, and then we think about all the other times that we didn't. And yet we have a Father that is taking what we think of as our mess ups, our failures. I tried and it was not very good. And he's hanging it on the fridge in heaven, replaying it for all the angels. Guys, look at this. Look what they did for me. They almost took their first step. And all we see is we sat back down on our diapers and tried to crawl. And he is excited over the step. It's a mindset change. Starting to realize that he is not who we thought he was. We've been given an image by people of a God who is strict and demanding, waiting for us to fail, thinking more about our weakness, not realizing that he chose us already knowing the whole story. That when he invited us, when he gave us that invitation to do it, he already knew what was going to come out of it. All we can see is my brush just smeared these two colors into this other color. That's not what I thought was going to happen. That's not what I thought. And Dad's like, now that's part of the picture that I was looking for from the very beginning. We see a moment as if it was eternity, but he sees eternity and every moment within it. We judge way too quickly. We judge ourselves. We judge our response. We judge our performance way too quickly. And he's inviting us into a revelation of his heart. You know, you can take two ugly things and put them together and make them beautiful. You can take boring things and make them into something astounding. When they're put into the right place at the right time, when they're seen from the right perspective. Sometimes the beauty, it requires you to actually be standing in the right place. Remember when Greg was talking, he was talking about that piece of art that he did to be able to see the sunrise. When you sit in this particular place, looking in this particular way, then you can recognize it. But until then, it's not going to really make a lot of sense. We see that we're being asked to make a window, but it's pointing in the wrong direction. And all it takes is a perspective change for the beauty to come into view. That what looked plain mundane, ordinary, out of place, odd, different. That what looked like mistake, failure, messed it up, just takes a different perspective to realize the beauty of the whole. Anybody heard of J.R.R. Tolkien? I never know, is it Tolkien or Tolkien? Tolkien. I've heard all four. I see words, I don't always know how to say them right. Yeah, I'm having fun with this today. I'm still surprised how it would. I'm pressing on it right now and it's not coming down. I don't understand. Somehow those mistakes are going to be a beautiful moment. He wrote an earlier work that he called The Silmarillion. It was just a collection of stories that he wrote about the beginnings before the popular tales that we're familiar with, like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Some of you may know Tolkien was Tolkien, one of those words, was quite a theologian, extremely intelligent with a very strong faith. And he was not trying to write an allegory or a picture of how things were, but he was communicating truth in beautiful ways, not by looking directly at it, but if you saw it from the side. In the Silmarillion, at one point, he shares his kind of creation story. And I'm not going to share this with the idea that this is what it was like in the actual creation. But you'll hear some pieces in this that perhaps I can weave into what I've been saying to show something different. Because sometimes we make mistakes, and that is part of God's story. And then sometimes there are things that happen that were actually intentional to disrupt. But God is able to use that as well to make something beautiful. There was Eru, the one who in Arda is called Iluvatar. And he made first the Ainur, the holy ones that were the offspring of his thought, and they were with him before aught else was made. And he spoke to them, propounding to them themes of music, and they sang before him, and he was glad. But for a long while they sang only each alone, or but a few together, while the rest hearkened, for each comprehended only that part of the mind of Iluvatar from which he came. And in the understanding of their brethren they grew but slowly. Yet ever as they listened, they came to deeper understanding and increased in unison in harmony. And it came to pass that Iluvatar called together all the Ainur and declared to them a mighty theme, unfolding to them things greater and more wonderful than he had yet revealed. And the glory of its beginning and the splendor of its end amazed the Ainur, so that they bowed before Iluvatar and were silent. Then Iluvatar said to them, of the theme that I have declared to you, I will now, that ye make in harmony together a great music. And since I have kindled you with a flame imperishable, ye shall show forth your powers in adorning this theme, each with his own thoughts and devices, if he will. But I will sit and hearken and be glad that through you great beauty has been awakened into song. Then the voices of the Ainur, like unto harps and lutes and pipes and trumpets and viols and organs, like unto the countless choirs singing with words, began to fashion the theme of Iluvatar to a great music, and a sound arose. of endless interchanging melodies woven in harmony that pass beyond hearing into the depths and into the heights, and the places of the dwelling of Iluvatar were filled to overflowing. And the music and the echo of the music went out into the void, and it was not void. Never since have the Ainur made any music like to this music, though it has been said that a greater still shall be made before Iluvatar by the choirs of the Ainur and the children of Iluvatar after the end of days. Then the themes of Iluvatar shall be played aright and take being in the moment of their utterance, for all shall then understand fully his intent in their part, and each shall know the comprehension of each, and Iluvatar shall give to their thoughts the secret fire, being well pleased. But now Iluvatar sat and hearkened, and for a great while it seemed good to him, for in the music there were no flaws. But as the theme progressed, it came into the heart of Melkor to interweave matters of his own imagination that were not in accord with the theme of Iluvatar, for he sought therein to increase the power and the glory of the part assigned to him. To Melkor among the Ainur had been given the greatest gifts of power and knowledge, and he had a share in all the gifts of his brethren. He had gone often alone into the void places, seeking the imperishable flame, for desire grew hot within him to bring into being things of his own. And it seemed to him that Iluvatar took no thought for the void, and he was impatient of its emptiness. Yet he found not the fire, for it is with Iluvatar. But being alone, he had begun to conceive thoughts of his own, unlike those of his brethren. Some of these thoughts he now wove into his music, and straightway discord arose about him, and many that sang nigh him grew despondent, and their thought was disturbed, and their music faltered. But some began to attune their music to his rather than to the thought which they had at first. Then the discord of Melkor spread ever wider, and the melodies which had been heard before foundered in a sea of turbulent sound. But Iluvatar sat and hearkened until it seemed that about his throne there was a raging storm, as of dark waters that made war one upon another in an endless wrath that would not be assuaged. Then Iluvatar arose, and the Ainur perceived that he smiled. And he lifted up his left hand, and a new theme began amid the storm, like and yet unlike to the former theme. And it gathered power, and it had new beauty. But the discord of Melkor rose in uproar and contended with it. And again there was a war of sound more violent than before, until many of the Ainur were dismayed and sang no longer, and Melkor had the mastery. Then again Iluvatar rose, and the Ainur perceived that his countenance was stern, and he lifted up his right hand, and behold, a third theme grew amid the confusion. And it was unlike the others, for it seemed at first soft and sweet, a mere rippling of gentle sounds and delicate melodies, but it could not be quenched, and it took to itself power and profundity. And it seemed at last that there were two musics progressing at one time before the sea of Iluvatar, and they were utterly at variance. The one was deep and wide and beautiful, but slow and blended with an immeasurable sorrow from which its beauty chiefly came. The other had now achieved a unity of its own, but it was loud and vain and endlessly repeated. And it had little harmony, but rather a clamorous unison as of many trumpets braying upon a few notes. And it essayed to drown the other music by the violence of its voice, but it seemed that its most triumphant notes were taken by the other and woven into its own solemn pattern. In the midst of this strife, whereat the halls of Iluvatar shook and a tremor ran out into the silences, yet unmoved, Iluvatar arose a third time, and his face was terrible to behold. Then he raised up both his hands, and in one chord, deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament, piercing as the light of the eye of Iluvatar, the music ceased. Then Iluvatar spoke, and he said, "Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor, but that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Iluvatar, those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me. nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. And the Ainur were afraid, and they did not yet comprehend the words that were said to them. And Melchior was filled with shame, of which came secret anger. But Iluvatar arose in splendor, and he went forth from the fair regions that he had made for the Ainur, and the Ainur followed him. But when they were come into the void, Iluvatar said to them, behold your music. And he showed to them a vision, giving to them sight where before there was only hearing. And they saw a new world made visible before them, and it was globed amid the void, and it was sustained therein, but was not of it. And as they looked and wondered, this world began to unfold its history, and it seemed to them that it lived and grew. And when the Ainur had gazed for a while and were silent, the Iluvatar said again, behold your music. This is your minstrelsy. And each of you shall find contained herein, amid the design that I have set before you, all those things which it may seem that he himself devised or added. And thou, Melchior, wilt discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind, and wilt perceive that they are but a part of the whole tributary, and to its glory. So many things in that piece. Our mistakes and even the rebellion of others is just part of a greater picture that is still being painted in the world. The beauty of the one who is the source and the redemption and the freedom is seen most clearly because of the need of redemption. And it's the mistakes that reveal the beauty. Now, our mistakes are not like the purposeful discordant sounds, but if he can take the very thing that was intended to disrupt his intention from the beginning and turn it into something more beautiful than ever thought, can he not take our small failings when we try out of a desire to please him and turn them into something more beautiful than what we could imagine? Perfection is not beauty in and of itself. A lot of the things that we consider great art, it's because of the imperfection in them that gives them value. Because that's how he created it to be. That's what he intended from the very beginning. So when we get to make our sound, when we get to release our color, when we get to share thoughts and pictures that we have with others, when we get to obey those little small promptings that he has given, we're releasing a sound into the world. And that sound, even when we make mistakes, is part of a greater theme that he is using to declare his glory to the cosmos. And there will be a day when we will look back upon it all and we will see the part that it played. Until then, we just get to do our little piece. Our little bit, that little stretch feels a little bit uncomfortable, and I don't know how it's going to work. It's okay. You don't have to. That didn't sound like I wanted it to sound. It's okay. It didn't have to. How many of you, when Jenny began to dance earlier, could feel the anointing on the dance? Even when she fell. Mine too. I don't know if you heard that. She said she felt Jesus more in that moment when she fell than the whole rest of the time dancing. That was part of it that was intended by him that people watching would have thought was a mistake. Do you get it? Yeah. So, we get to be a beautiful mess that declares the glory of God.
The heavenly pattern, the tabernacle pattern, is a connecting place between heaven and earth. And when we create from within its value, from this place of connection and co-creation, the power of God will be released in ways that we can't even dream of.